Welcome to the Superhumanized podcast. I'm your host, Ariana Summer. This episode is different. It is personal because for the first time, I will be sharing something I have not yet spoken about publicly. My father passed away this March, just 2 days before my birthday. And in the weeks that followed, I gave myself permission to fully grieve, to feel, to remember, and to process. It was a very conscious act of mourning, supported by ceremony, solitude, and also by ketamine therapy, medically supervised at our clinic in Santa Monica. It helped me meet the waves of grief and let them move through me, not around me. And in that space, I kept returning to one question: why in our culture is death treated as something to avoid, deny, or sanitize? Why is something so universal, so sacred, still held in so much fear? Let me do that one sentence again, James, because there was a car honking. You may have heard it. I'll actually start 2 sentences prior. And in that space, I kept returning to one question: why in our culture is death treated as something to avoid, deny, or sanitize? Why is something so universal, so sacred, still held in so much fear? Today's guest has devoted her entire life to shifting that. Barbara Karnes is a hospice pioneer and one of the most respected voices in end-of-life education. Her booklet, Gone From My Sight, known as The Little Blue Book, has sold over 40 million copies worldwide and changed how countless families understand and approach death. In this conversation, Barbara offers profound wisdom. She offers a map, a presence, a way of holding death that allows us to also hold life more fully. This is much more than a conversation about dying. It is a conversation about what it means to live without fear and to love more openly, even at the edge of goodbye.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Barbara, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for making time today and coming on to the Superhumanized podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to some really good conversation.
Me too, Barbara. And before we begin, I want to share something personal that I have not spoken yet about on this podcast. And so, March 7th of this year, my father passed. He was nearly 90 years old. He passed just 2 days before my birthday. And it was a profound moment of rupture as well as remembrance. And he had been battling Parkinson's for a long time. I lived in the United States. Him and my mom lived in Germany after he retired. And I chose to grieve consciously. I took 10 days offline, away from work, away from any expectations, and I just gave myself space to feel. And in my work and life, I often speak about vitality, longevity, and healing. And just to share with you also, the things that I do with my husband is we have a longevity clinic, a wellness clinic in Santa Monica, where we also offer, because mental health is such an important pillar to all over health. So we offer medically prescribed and supervised ketamine therapy, something that has helped hundreds of patients that came through here. And I also turned to that same support myself. And it helped me meet the grief, not as an enemy, but as a gatekeeper. I did not want to bypass the pain. I wanted to honor it and learn from it. That's why this conversation with you, Barbara, feels so timely and, yeah, even sacred to me. And I feel my throat constricting because I'm getting emotional. And that's a beautiful thing. Because when we speak of death with tenderness and with truth, such as you do in the sacred work you do, we're not speaking of endings. We're speaking in a sense of what it really means to live. So I am just so grateful you're here. And one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you is I see you someone who helps dissolve this cultural chain of fear that surrounds death. You offer something very rare, a way to name the process of dying without stripping it of its mystery and I know I usually don't do these types of monologues in the beginning, but I think we live in a time, especially in the West, where death has become taboo, it's hidden, it's medicalized, and even mythologized in the wrong ways. And you are someone, you speak about it, you write about it with clarity and without dread. And I think there's also something deeply feminine about this capacity to hold space for the unknowable while still gently naming what we can know. And you once said, Barbara, that dying follows a near identical process, a script, so to say, and that most people die in a very similar way, and that knowing this process can ease the fear. So I would like to know more about what you've identified as this process. What are the tenets of it? And also what happens to the fear, both for the dying and the loved ones when the script is named?
Okay. I took a couple notes so that I don't forget the things that popped into my head when you were talking. There are really only two ways to die. You either die fast, get hit by a truck, have a heart attack, suicide, or you die gradually. And a gradual death has a process to it. It doesn't just happen. If it just happened, it would be fast death. So there are things that we look for that say when a person has entered the dying process, when they have begun their gradual death. And with gradual death, there are two aspects. One is a disease. You get a disease, you're not fixable, and you die. Or old age. Old age. Your body begins a dying process. It just takes longer. So here's what you're going to look for. Three things. And I don't talk in medicalese. I talk so that people can really understand and appreciate what I'm saying and not getting lost in medical terminology. So three things that we look for. A person's eating habits change. A person's sleeping habits change. And a person begins withdrawing from the world around them. And with disease, this begins 3 to 4 to 5 months before death comes. It starts with a person, they're not eating meat. And then pretty soon it's not fruits and vegetables. And then as a caregiver, you're trying your darndest to get them to eat, and they don't. And then in the weeks before death, the person's probably not eating anything. And as they get even closer to death, they're not drinking anything. Person's sleeping habits increase. And so months before death, 2, 3, 4 months before death, a person starts taking an afternoon nap. And then pretty soon it's a morning and an afternoon nap. And then they're asleep all evening in front of the TV. You wake them up, they go to bed, and they sleep all night. And then in the weeks before death, they're asleep more than they're awake. And the third thing that I look for, and we all can look for, is a person's socialization changes. Again, months before death from disease, a person isn't interested in the guy that was always the football player. He's not interested in watching his games. Then gradually this withdrawal from the outer world and what goes on around us goes inward. And then from not interested in what's going on in the world, they start withdrawing socially. They're not going to go to a movie, or they're not going to go with friends. They're not interested in that. And again, as death gets closer, then it's don't have the grandkids come over. I'm just too tired. They go completely within. And by the time labor begins, they're completely within. And what it's like life is a billion-piece jigsaw puzzle. And they're putting all these pieces of their life together. And they reach a point where there's only room for one in there as they're processing and looking at their life.
Yes, what you've just shared, Barbara, I have not personally observed because I was not with my father in the last months of his life, but that's also what my mother shared. And I'm curious, with the work that you do, how have you seen people transform or perhaps soften when they're invited to recognize dying as a natural and also a knowledgeable, a knowable passage?
Knowledge reduces fear, and all of us are going to bring fear to the bedside of someone who's dying. From the moment of diagnosis until death, we carry fear within us, whether it's the caregiver, the family, and the patient that's dying themselves. So fear is a big factor, and knowledge reduces fear. So if we teach and the family and caregivers have knowledge of this dying process, then they're going to see that dad's doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Nothing bad is happening.
Yeah.
This is very sad, but dad's doing a good job. This is how the body dies.
That actually really touched something in me, and I'm certain it'll also resonate with people in the audience who have been close to death or witnessed it. That was just so beautiful what you said about dad is doing a good job. This is exactly what's supposed to happen. I wish this was something they would teach us in schools, and to be able not only to see, but to acknowledge that what is happening is right and it's natural and even sacred. The little blue book of yours, The Gone From My Sight, has sold over 40 million copies and changed how so many individuals and families across the world approach death. Why do you think this work of yours has become such a phenomenon, Barbara?
Everybody dies, and everyone in their life is going to have someone close to them or not so close to them die. And we, particularly Americans, do not have any role models on what it's like to die. We have television and the movies, and that's not how people die. But unless there's a little blue book that says, here's what dying is like from a gradual standpoint, here's what's going to happen. And so as you read this, you go, oh, yeah, dad's doing this. Oh, and he's doing that. And there's that reassurance that nothing bad is happening.
Yes.
And see, we don't have those role models. It used to be, grandma used to live at home. And when she got sick, she went to the upstairs bedroom, and there she died. And then our American history, what happened is hospitals came into play, and grandma would go not at home, but to the hospital. And in the hospital, when she was dying, she was put at the end of the hall, and family and nobody was there. And then as our history progressed, we went to nursing facilities. And that's where grandma died. We're coming full circle. And now grandma's dying at home. Now, grandma always wanted to die at home. It's just that our society is such that now we're coming full circle. But with that, we don't know what grandma's doing isn't pathological and isn't bad. So
Yeah.
this is why we have to teach. And school, in high school, I used to go to a couple of different high schools when I was the director of a hospice, and I taught seniors, taught a class, one class, but better than none, about exactly what we're talking about today. And I always felt good about that because I was giving really tools for our tool belt of life. And it should start early. And we tend to protect our children. And so when the dog gets run over by a car, we tell them, yeah, the dog went someplace else. We don't address death. We try to cover it up. And that when we do that, then we're not prepared when death comes and how to deal with our grief. Because how we look at dying will also affect how we grieve.
Yes, yes, Barbara. And it really strikes me so profoundly. It seems to me we are a culture that has forgotten how to die. And what you just shared about teaching seniors in high school about death, these are some of the most important tools that could be taught to us. Because as you said, everybody will experience someone they love dying. Everybody will die. And you mentioned something else just a minute ago about how grandmother used to, when she went into the process of dying, she'd go into the room upstairs and at some point she would die. And that's also what grandma wants. Do you think part of the struggle that we're experiencing nowadays comes also from how we've shaped society? The nuclear family model that's so common in Western culture, and that I think sprung forth from the Industrial Revolution, if I'm correct. So, that nuclear family model that's sold to us as this is what family is, that isolates us. Do you think we're carrying more than we were ever meant to carry alone, from a knowledge or not knowing perspective, but also from a care perspective?
We've become such a mobile society. It used to be we lived generational, and if not in the same house, then in the same town. And so we had interaction with each other. And that from that interaction came support for each other. And now we're scattered literally all over the world. And we have grown away from this family support to being a standalone, I can do this, and this is how my life is, and having to figure out on your own. And dying really is a communal event. It is not a medical event. It is about those close to us and the community. That's what dying is about. And that's where we get our guidance and our strength, is from addressing what is out there being offered. And that's end of life doulas, that's hospice, that's literature to read, knowledge, so that you don't have to be that isolated family while someone special is dying.
Yeah. Yeah. It brings up also memory in me. A couple of years ago, my mother, who was my dad's main caregiver, she had an accident. She fractured her hip, and it was really fortunate that, not that she fractured her hip, but that at that time when that happened, I was already in Germany visiting, and I extended my stay. And for a few weeks, I cared with the support of my husband. I cared for both of my parents, and I was really grateful to be there. And both of them, which I was just so humbled by, expressed their gratitude to me for being there, where I felt this is just so little what I'm doing in the scheme of things. But the truth also is that I felt overwhelmed because this is not something that's we grow into, that's taught to us. So I tried to hide it, but caregiving, it pulled on parts of me that I had not fully met before, and I have not met them before because, again, this is not something that is part of our cultural discourse. And looking back, I realize that most families today are so isolated, as you have spoken of. We live in little pockets and nuclear structures. We're separated from the tribal, how we used to live, and also the extended family models that once held death communally. And you just put it so beautifully. This is a communal thing, not a hospital medical thing. And now caregiving, it all often falls on one or two people. It can be beautiful. It can also be depleting. And I wonder if this modern structure has made something that should be sacred into something that's can be quite difficult and often unbearable. And you, Barbara, you've worked closely with caregivers, both on the professional side as well as on the family side. And I'd like to learn more from your experience. What are the emotional and spiritual costs of caregiving, and what can make it a healing experience and not just a hard one?
The responsibility of a caregiver, whether it's daughter, granddaughter, grandson, whoever is taking on that responsibility, is generally overwhelming. And what I see most is that the caregiver gets lost in the shuffle. They're the ones doing all the work, and yet all the attention is going on the person that's dying. And no one seems to recognize the stress. The caregiver's grieving before the person ever dies. They're overwhelmed because they have lack of knowledge on how do I do this. And it's 24/7 work. It isn't that at an end of an 8-hour day, they can go home. They're the ones that get up in the middle of the night. And so the physical toll that is involved with being a caregiver, and then add the emotional toll of this is mom, this is dad.
Yeah.
Now add the lack of knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that dad's not doing what Judi Dench did in the movie when she died. Dad's not doing that. Dying isn't pretty. Dying isn't, we say something profound and then we close our eyes.
Mm.
There's spit, there's poop, there's actions, there's all kinds of unsightly things that we think when we see it, something's wrong, something bad is happening. And so we need to educate our caregiver as much as we need to educate everybody about how death comes. The person that has the life-threatening illness, they need to know what their path is going to be, what's going to happen, how's this going to unfold, because most of us think we're going to be alive one minute and dead the next. And so when this process begins, as the person begins withdrawing from the world, which they will do, they really lose touch with our reality. And the caregiver doesn't anticipate that, know what to do with it.
Yes.
So we need to educate both the patients, all of us, because we're all going to die, and caregivers, because most of us will be involved with someone on a personal level who is dying. And so let's prepare ourselves not just on what dying, what happens, but what do we do while it's happening?
Yes, Barbara. And before we go into that, because you just brought up the great example of Judi Dench, and mom's not doing what Judi Dench was doing. And you mentioned it also prior in this conversation that the death is, and also especially death from disease, is not like the movies show it. So let's illuminate what are some of the most persistent cultural myths about dying. For example, you said, oh, you're alive 1 minute and then the next you're dead. What are some other really persistent cultural myths about dying? And what are the truths we need instead?
Wow, big question. All right. There is a labor to dying that most of us are totally unaware of. We go through labor to get into this world, and we go through labor to leave it. There's a lot of similarities between birth and death. And when the labor begins, 1 to 3 weeks before death comes, we need to know, we caregivers need to know what to do, what it looks like. The person is sleeping most of the time. Their breathing is start and stop. You look up and think, oh my gosh, he just died. He's not breathing. And then pretty soon he starts breathing again. There's often random hand movements, picking of the air, just random. They're talking to and about people and things that we have no idea what they're talking about. And we say, oh, Dad's confused. I like to think that Dad is a window into the other world, and he's telling us what his world now is like. As death gets closer, there are other changes that we look for that say we're talking minutes to hours. And that's the breathing gets slower and slower till you think they're not going to take another breath, and they do. And in this point, the person's what I call non-responsive. I believe they can hear, but they're so otherworldly, they're not in touch with this world. So we talk to them, we love them. Then there's what is the scariest part. Let's put it that way. And that is the person begins breathing like a little fish breathes when you take it out of water, that gaping, and it gets slower and slower. And then there'll be a momentary, generally, facial expression change. It's often a frown, a grimace. It's no, I don't want to leave that which I know. Following that movement, there will be 1 or 2 long spaced out breaths. You think they're not going to take another breath, and they do. This is Barbara. But I believe this moment, this no, once in a while I've seen a smile, but most of the time it's not. I believe that's the moment the driver of this physical car that we get around in on this planet in gets out of the vehicle, gets out of the body. That's the moment of disconnect. But most of us don't know that, any of that. And so we're watching and going, oh, something awful is happening. And it's just normal how we getting into this world is hard work. The labor, it's hard work, not just for the mother, but for the one being born. It's hard work. It's hard work. in the labor to leave this world also.
You know what listening to what you're describing, and also particularly this moment where you said it's the getting out of the driver's seat of this human vessel that we've been driving around in this world, and that this is a very natural and actually also beautiful moment. But when we don't know about what's happening, we may be thinking, oh my God, something awful is happening. And what I feel running through your work, but also experiencing you right now, Barbara, there's just from the clarity, the education, and even the courage that it may have initially taken to name this process of dying, there's also something quieter and really powerful, and that is presence. I note an incredible presence in you, and that also transfers into your work and what you have helped so many people connect with. The presence of someone at the bedside, the presence of the family being prepared, and presence of you witnessing again and not turning away. And so many of us feel helpless around death because we don't understand it. We don't know how to interpret what's happening. And also we think we need to do something, right? And of course we do things like the water, make sure the bed's comfortable. But what I mean by doing is more, we feel like we need to do something, like we need to fix something, maybe even save someone. And your work reminds us that the act of being there, really being there, sitting in stillness and breathing beside someone, not leaving, loving them, like you said before, is its own kind of medicine, so to speak. And that being said, and connecting it to what you just described, Barbara, of the frown, the breath, this moment where we basically disembark our vessel, for the caregiver, for the witness, what is the role of the witness in that particular moment of the dying process? And how can we learn to show up not as experts or fixers, but as the steady, sacred, even presence?
Sacred is the word that I would use. I'm glad you used that, because dying is a sacred experience that we're all going to go through. And so we want to neutralize the fear that everyone brings so that they can touch in to the sacredness of the moment. So how do you do that? It's if you have someone there, whether it's an end-of-life doula, whether it's a transition volunteer, church member, hospice, in those hours before death, here's what if I could say, this is perfect, this is what I would see, okay? There would be one person that understands and is not emotionally involved, who can be the conductor of this experience and guide everyone there to make this a sacred experience. Okay? How do you do that? In the hours before death, a person's going to be non-responsive. They may be moving, they may have their mouth open, talk, but they're not making sense. They're non-responsive. Encourage each person there to go in quietly by themselves and sit with the person that is actively dying. I believe a person can hear, and so you talk to them and say everything that's in your heart. Everything that you want to say to them. Talk about the good times. Talk about the challenging times. Remember, Dad, when you took me out behind the barn and you beat the tar out of me? You shouldn't have done that. That still hurts. You talk about the good and the difficult. And say whatever's in your heart. and then leave and let someone else come in and have everyone there say their goodbyes. And remember, the person who is dying is processing their life.
Yeah.
What have I done? Who have I touched? So you're helping those pieces of puzzle. Now everyone's had their chance. Then you bring everyone back in. And this conductor, so to speak, guides the family. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a room, person's actively dying, and every family member person that's there is standing against the wall as far away as they can get, holding their hands, watching. And what I say is, you want to crawl in bed with Dad and hold him? Do it. You want to sit by him and hold his hand? Do it. Whatever your heart tells you to do, be close and support and love this person as they're leaving this world. Most people don't know that they can do that. And so someone has to say, you can do whatever your heart tells you that you need to do at this moment. When the person takes their last breath and this conductor is guiding verbally, all right, I think we're very close. Look what Dad's doing. Look how he's breathing like a little fish breathes. He'll take a couple more breaths. When Dad's gone and everyone has been there around the bed, and I always say, how about everyone go out and put the coffee pot on? I'm going to tidy, and then I'm going to come and get you. I tidied the bed. He straightened his body, wipe and wash whatever needs to be wiped and washed, and there's often, it's not pretty, so I cleaned them up. I put a small light on in the room and then go out and ask each person to go in and say goodbye. Say goodbye to his body, because that's how we recognized him. And before I ever called the funeral home, I have each person go in alone and say goodbye and touch, hold, talk. Say it all again, whatever your heart tells you. Then I call the funeral home and I stay until the funeral home has taken the body. And I will then go into the room and I will tidy the room again. I will make the bed just like I make it with a bedspread. I'll do it with a sheet or a blanket. Keep the light dim and put something special on the pillow. I've taken pictures off the wall. I've put rosaries, stuffed animals, a flower, something on that pillow, and leave a light on. Not a big one, but a little one. Rooms have memories. And I want that memory to be when they walk by the room, like it's a little memorial there in the room that will soften the experience of when Dad died in there. That's how I envision and would love to have every person on this planet have that opportunity, not just as a family member or a friend, but in dying. That's how I want, what I want you all to do when I'm dying. It works both ways, and I think it's a sacred experience.
Yes, Barbara, how beautiful and how profound. And I have emotions welling up again. I wish everybody on the planet could hear this. It can be, and it is so tremendously healing. And I think so many of us carry the pressure of trying to get it right, to offer a perfect goodbye. And maybe the sacredness of parting is not in being perfect, but in being present and allowing what you said, allowing it to be real, to be messy, to be human. And also, what it surprised me, it may surprise others in the audience as well, what you said about talking to dad. Hey, when you took me behind the barn and you beat me, that was not good and it still hurts today. And it makes so much sense because the soul making this passage is also putting everything back together. And truly, I think love is not whitewashing, putting someone on the pedestal and make them look perfect. If we truly love, we'll love someone for everything that they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's the biggest gift I think we can give someone, not the demand or that someone be perfect or painting their picture as perfect. And
When someone dies, we that are left behind automatically elevate that person to sainthood. Only talk about all the good stuff.
yeah,
And yet there is no perfect relationship. And life has its ups and downs. And in our grieving, we have to work through the challenging times as well as the good times. The challenging times are the bigger weight in our grieving than the good times. It's the challenging times that pull us down and slow us down in learning how to live without this person.
yes, that rings very true, Barbara. And I had the opportunity to start grieving years prior to my father passing due to also knowing with Parkinson's, that's a condition that the physical deterioration, the mental, which he didn't really have until the very last weeks, that will progress. There's just nothing as of now that can be done to really halt it. And so I was fortunate because I knew this is not something to be suppressed. And I started grieving before he ever passed. And there's the part of grieving, if we get the opportunity, that we can be with prior to the loved one passing, whether it's days, weeks, months, or even years. And then there's also the grieving after the person has passed. And I sometimes feel that the soul of the person who passed understands, or yeah, understanding is probably the word, or senses our intention, maybe even more so than our words or actions. Barbara, so what I'm really curious about, Barbara, is do you believe there's communication, whether it's spoken or unspoken, that continues after death, after the physical death?
It's a tough question. I'm not going to answer it. And I'll tell you why. Because I don't want to inject my personal spiritual beliefs into my work, because we human beings tend to discredit people who don't believe as we do. So I don't share my spiritual beliefs because I want everyone to hear what I am teaching about end of life. And it's a thin line because end of life is a spiritual event. It is very spiritual, but we will each deal with that from our own spiritual foundation.
That is so loving and so wise, Barbara. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for this. This makes total sense. And yeah, it holds the sanctity of your work, of what you offer up. And yeah, to not be exclusionary, I hear that is very important. There's something else I really thought about preparing for this conversation. I live in Los Angeles. This is a place, due to the movie industry and others, where youth is almost a currency. And also the health and wellness world, I move in as a wellness entrepreneur, as a biohacker, as the host of this podcast. It's filled with the language of vitality, anti-aging, and longevity. And while I find that there is deep beauty in honoring the gift of life and also stewarding it away so we can live well and can live well long, I've also come to recognize and acknowledge something underneath that. So much of this pursuit is not just about health, it's about not dying. If you look at one very famous, currently famous biohacker, Brian Johnson, his slogan is literally "don't die." So it's about pushing back against the unknown, about trying to, in a sense, trying to out-engineer impermanence. And I've come to wonder, what if our cultural dysfunction with death is not just a side note, but actually a root cause, the kind of a silent architect of so much of the suffering and the disconnection and the anxiety we're experiencing? I'm curious, Barbara, your take on this, and also, depending on what your take is, how we could, or what if we reframe this entire story?
I think it goes back to our history in dealing with death. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, Grandma died at home. We understood and accepted death. It was going to happen. It was not abnormal. This was life. But as we have become more sophisticated in our knowledge of living in science and everything, death has become the enemy instead of part of the natural process of living. And so we fight it because it's the enemy. And medically, we've reached a point where we can extend life. We're conquering diseases. And so we pretend that we can conquer all diseases and conquer death. Not going to happen, but we pretend it is. And part of that has been very good. It used to be the life expectancy was you were old at 40.
Yeah.
And now you're old in your 90s. Okay. But the 60s and 70s, my goodness, that's young and vital. And so we have gotten away from recognizing that everybody dies, that death is a part of life. And with all the science and all the amazing, we're sending someone into space, for goodness sake. All that we can do, then why can't we conquer death and make it so nobody dies?
Yes. And I feel truly so blessed, Barbara, for being able to have these incredible conversations with incredible souls such as yourself. Coincidentally, this morning, another conversation I had, which touched a lot on rejuvenation, death, how to manage or avoid the symptoms of death, and much more, was with a geneticist, Dr. George Church. So I'm just so grateful to be able to dive into your brilliant brain, Dr. Church's brilliant brain, and look at all these different frequencies, messages that surround us as human beings with regard to death. And that being said, from your experience, you mentioned some of it before with how death has been medicalized. I hope I'm grammatically saying this correctly. But how has this Western approach or fear of death, seeing death as the enemy, how has it shaped the systems we live in? And what would begin to shift when we stop seeing death as a failure and actually begin to see death as part of life's design?
I don't know that we're going to get there, but that's being pessimistic. Our medical model, that which we base all of our medical activity, is based, let me reword, our medical model treats diseases that people happen to have. Our medical model's focus is on the disease, not on the person. End of life workers, hospice, end of life doulas, their focus is on people that happen to have disease. What I think would benefit all of us is if our medical model addressed people that happen to have disease. But that said, if that is the case, it was concentrating on the disease, not the person, that got us medically to where we are today.
Yes.
And that continues to be energy behind extending life. Is they're not looking at the person. So I'll learn from you, even if you die, even if it's uncomfortable. I, the physician, will learn from you. That's their focus. I want to see people have the choice. Yes, there's a lot of people that'll say, yes, do everything you can to keep this body going and learn what you can. But there's also people who are going to say, no, not so much. Just we tried and let me be. I want everyone to have that choice.
Yes.
And they don't really have that choice yet.
Now, something really crucial, and I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah. And the only choice people sometimes have, like I have experienced it with my family, also with my father, is to put in writing that you refuse certain things. But I think the choice over how you engage with the process of your own death, that's fundamental. That should be sacred. That should be enshrined in choice. I wonder also, of course, death as that unfolding towards what we see the end of our existence, at least of this earth life. Is there maybe something like a sacred rehearsal? Do you think we need to rehearse death in small ways throughout our life, through letting go, through change, or consciously meeting endings in order to die?
There are deaths all over the place. One death is the physical body. There's death of a relationship. There's death of a job. There's just death of a place where you live. There's deaths all over. And each one of those deaths that we incur helps us with our final death that we'll have. We will grieve the death of a job or the death of a move, and that grief, it's almost like a dress rehearsal, because as we go, life is school.
Yeah.
It's a place of learning. And so all our early deaths are preparing us for dealing with the death, the loss of someone that has meaning to us in our lives.
Barbara, for someone like you who's witnessed what so many of us are afraid of, and witnessing it not once, not twice, but hundreds of times, and from up close, not even from a distance, I would like to ask you, not just as an educator, as the force that you are in this world, but as someone who's lived beside this veil. After decades of being with the dying, has your personal relationship with death changed? And if so, how?
Wow. I'm still scared because it's an unknown. I haven't done it before. I don't remember having done it before. And so anytime we do something new, we're going to be at least nervous or apprehensive. Now, because of how we die, I will reach a point where it doesn't matter. And that fear will dissolve and I will let go. But from this moment until I go into labor, yeah, I'm scared. I don't want to do this. I'm nervous about what it's going to be like. That's normal. We are all going to be nervous to some degree when it comes time to die.
Yes, I like to think about myself that I'm not afraid of death, maybe of dying, depending on what it entails. You don't want to get eaten by a crocodile or drown or driven in half by a truck. Okay, my writer's mind is coming up with all these scenarios. But the truth is that, so this is really beautiful to hear from you, Barbara, because I think that is something probably most of us, all of us share. We haven't done it before. And yes, we're afraid. The only way through it is indeed through it. And I do think by what you have shared about the process, that it's not only preparing ourselves for when a loved one makes the transition, but it may also help ourselves. Because, truth be known, it could happen any day, no matter what your age is. Something that's really important, we talked about it just a few minutes ago. I'd like to do a deeper dive into it. In your work, you include the grieving process, also in your end of life series. And it's not an afterthought, but it's an integral part of this, what I like to call a sacred unfolding. And in our culture, grief is often seen as something linear or something contained within a certain amount of time, something to get over with. But the truth is that grief takes many shapes. Some people weep, some create, some celebrate. And for some, it's a really long, slow wave that never leaves, but maybe just changes. Barbara, why is it important to understand grief, not just as an aftermath, but as part of the dying process itself?
We are going to grieve. Let me back up. Just like we die the way we've lived and we die according to our personality, we also grieve according to our personality. So if I am a very emotional person, my grief is going to come out strongly in emotions. If I'm a very mental person, then I'm going to process and I will mentally deal with grief. So we look at a person's personality, but there's also Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about stages of grief. And those, what she doesn't say, what she left out is that it isn't a one-time deal. First you're numb and then you are angry and then at the end of these steps, acceptance. I think you can go through these time and time again. There'll be a time when you go, yeah, I see that his time on this planet was over and that he couldn't be fixed and that it was timely that he died. Mentally, yeah, I accept this. And then 3 hours later, I can be angry because he's gone. And so all these stages, they interlap and they repeat. And so there is a process, a normal process to grieving. and read My Friend I Care, which is my booklet on grief. But the key is that you have to learn how to go on living without this person. And that takes adjustment, it takes time. And each person's time is different. I've also noticed that oftentimes the second year following the death is actually harder than the first year. The first year, you're on automatic pilot, you're numb, you're totally lost and emotional, but you've got support because family and neighbors and friends, they recognize that you're grieving, and so they're there. By the second year, everyone else is thinking, something's wrong here. She should be fine now. It's been a year. She should be fine. And the thing is, in the second year, you don't have as much support and understanding for your grief as you did the first year. And that makes it harder.
That is so true. And I've heard from individuals also over the years that sometimes it's not even a year, but that they were expected after losing, for example, one woman who shared with me about grief, her grief, when she lost her partner, that within 3 months of his passing, she felt most of the time unspoken, but sometimes even uttered towards her. Yet life goes on. And she was so deeply grieving. From some people, she just got the feedback that this was something to move on from. And it was not a sacred process.
And that shows the lack of understanding
Yeah.
of those people that are not supportive.
Yes.
And that's really sad.
Yeah. And that's where your work, Barbara, comes in. Your work has shaped how, gosh, not just a generation, 2 generations approaches death, whether it's patients, families, nurses, and so many caregivers. And I feel, especially in our culture, what was once shrouded in silence is now a story we can share. And instead of confusion, you offer clarity. And you offer resources. You also offer a language. It's a kind of like a sacred literacy around dying, a way to see, to speak, and to feel this transition without fear or with less fear. To close this really beautiful conversation, because I know our time is limited, I would like to learn the following from you, Barbara. What do you hope your legacy continues to teach, especially to those who are just entering end of life care, or also for those who maybe have never even considered what death truly is until it touches them in a very personal way?
I hope my legacy is that I have been able to neutralize some of the fear that we carry around dying and death. That, as sad as it is, dying doesn't have to be bad, which is what most of us think of. And I hope that's what will be associated with my name.
I think it already is, Barbara. And for people who'd like to learn more about you, connect with you, where can they find you? And also, is there a particular offering right now you would guide them towards?
You can go to my website, and that is bkbooks.com. And I write a weekly blog. And from the website, you can sign up for that, and you get an email with the blog once a week, actually twice a week, because on Wednesdays it's the written blog, and on Sundays it's a podcast or some verbal taping.
Yeah.
I hope that I have everything on the website that will give you guidance and support.
It's a phenomenal website, just some personal input here. And I also highly recommend the blog and also the podcast. It's more than resources and tools. It's truly a transmission in a sense also that can help us attune with one of the most natural parts of life, which is death. Barbara, I am deeply grateful for you for making time and sharing not just your knowledge and expertise, but your profound wisdom, compassion, and clarity with which you approach this truly sacred work. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me here and giving me the opportunity to reach others so that they can think about this really important life experience that we're all going to have. And I appreciate that you are working toward getting that out and making a difference as well. We're on the same team, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it is my pleasure, and your very kind words are so gratefully received, Barbara. Thank you.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.